Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here on YouTube. So if you're at all involved in the world of guitars, you'll know that there's a lot of myths out there and there's a lot of just straight up bad information about playing guitar. So today in this video we are going to dive in and just debunk every guitar myth that I could possibly think of. I'm sure I left out a few, so leave any that I forgot down in the comments below and let's just get right into it. So in this list you'll find that, as with most things in life, the reality of any situation sits somewhere in the middle. Not to get too deep and philosophical, but we live in such a polarized world where everybody's goal is to just get clicks and get people riled up and get people's attention, and the specific opinions that really tend to do that are either really far to this side or really far to this side. You're really not going to ruffle any feathers if you're like, well, sometimes this is okay, but also sometimes this is okay. But anyways, the first myth is, I'm too old to learn how to play. You hear this all the time from obviously older folks, but it's really just a load of baloney because you don't have to start playing guitar at any certain age. There are some studies that show that it's easier to pick things up when you're younger as opposed to older, when all those neural connections in your brain are still forming, but it's literally never too late to learn a new skill, especially if you're disciplined and you just stick to it. Along those lines, you see a lot of people say, oh man, I wish I could play like that, but I just don't have any natural musical talent. Now yes, some people are just slightly naturally more musically inclined, but that doesn't really matter a whole lot because it doesn't matter how naturally inclined you are if you don't have the discipline and the drive to actually get better and practice your instrument. It's the classic saying of hard work beats talent when talent fails to work hard, or whatever. I would argue that talent is really kind of a myth concept in general. 99.9% of the time, it's really just dedication and practiced skill. Oh, but my hands are too small to play guitar or bass. This is a pretty big bass one. There are plenty of small-handed folks out there who play guitar. Like, look at kids, for example. There's tons of little, like, 8-year-old Chinese prodigy guitar players out there. If they can do it, you can do it too. Another common thing you'll see is people saying that beginners should start on classical guitar. People usually will just recommend this because the strings are easier to press down because they're nylon, but also the classical guitar has a much thicker neck, and there are certain things and skills that you build up by playing a steel string guitar that you just won't develop if you only play on nylon. So while I do think it's a good option, especially for like smaller kids, you can also learn on literally any guitar out there. What I personally love is this mini classical guitar. Because it's so much smaller than a normal classical, the neck basically just feels like a normal acoustic guitar neck, and so the fretting and everything all feels the same. The only downside is that you can't really reach very far up here. I think that's also a really good way to start, but like I said, anything works. There's also a lot of people out there who say that left-handed guitar players should just learn how to play right-handed because it'll be way easier for you to find guitars. Left-handed guitars are pretty notoriously kind of difficult to come by, but also the majority of all guitar content out there is made for righties. So if you're trying to learn how to play a song from watching a video, it might be kind of confusing. But my counter argument to this is that it's extremely difficult to try to force yourself to play right-handed if you are left-handed. The times that I've tried to play a left-handed guitar, it's been like nearly impossible for me. So I feel like for beginners in particular, trying to force yourself to play right-handed, it may kind of put you off from pursuing guitar because it is so difficult to do. I think just do whatever's most comfortable for you. So honestly, this one's more of a meme, but I thought I would address it anyways. The whole not being able to play Stairway to Heaven in a guitar store thing, I'm pretty sure that comes from a scene in Wayne's World where they had a sign that says no Stairway to Heaven, and since then it's just become like a meme because obviously it is a pretty overplayed song. Truly, you can play whatever you want in a guitar store and no one's gonna care. I like Stairway to Heaven actually. The one that I really couldn't stand was Sweet Child of Mine. I feel like people play that one way more, and for whatever reason, the guitar is always super out of tune when they're playing it. But also another thing I want to tack onto this point is the thought that people are going to judge you if you play badly, if you're not that good in a guitar store. That doesn't happen at all. The guitar community, for the most part, is pretty welcoming and accepting, and honestly, when you're in a guitar store, most of the time, everybody's just kind of worried about their own thing anyway, so they're not really paying attention to you. This one's for all the fellas out there, particularly the younger aged ones. There seems to be this idea, this notion in pop culture that playing guitar is going to make you cool, and it's going to make you get a bunch of girls and whatnot. That doesn't happen. Not a thing. That's not real. Most likely, if you play guitar enough to where you're good at it, you're just probably going to be a huge nerd like me. Just make sure you're playing guitar or really doing anything that you do in your life because you actually enjoy it. Another super goofy thing that I see people say is like, oh, I don't need to practice to a metronome. Because of whatever strange idea that people have, they say that like practicing to a metronome ruins your feel and ruins the soul of your playing. Oh no, I already have really good internal rhythm. No, you're just going to be playing off time. And then if you actually ever do have to record to a metronome in the studio, you're going to be really bad at it. Playing to a metronome is something that everybody should do. It's really just going to help with your timing overall. Also, if you do record to a metronome, it doesn't make it sound robotic or like fake or anything, because most of the time you're not quantizing every single note to the grid anyways. You're using the metronome as a guideline to like stay in time. Also, let's get real here. The whole idea of playing with feel is just like one of the most ridiculous things ever. If I told you to describe what playing with feel actually is, you couldn't do it. Because when you describe what people actually think it is, it just sounds really ridiculous. Most of the time people will say that, oh, if you're playing fast, that means you can't play with feel. That's just not true. And let me show you what most of these people think playing with feel is. Step 1, string bends. Step 2, pentatonic scale. Step 3, move the guitar around a bunch. Step 4, make a bunch of faces and get really into it. And there you go, now you're playing with feel. Honestly, the real playing with feel is just listening to the song and playing what the song actually needs. Because yeah, overplaying and doing a bunch of crazy like tapping and scale runs and whatnot, a lot of times not gonna be what the song needs. And by that same token, the whole idea that playing fast equals being a good guitar player, again, I would say that a good guitar player plays what the song needs and doesn't try to show off their chops or have to like be the most technically proficient. Also, another thing you see a lot is tone is in the hands or tone is in the fingers. Obviously, this is not something that's meant to be taken completely literally, even though there are people who do that. Basically just means that the way you play is more important than all of your gear and whatnot, whatever. I agree with that point, but when it comes down to actual guitar tone, how your guitar sounds, that is going to be so heavily influenced by the pickups you have, the pedals you're running through, the amp you have. It doesn't really matter all that much the techniques you're using and whatever if you're putting a bunch of distortion and effects on your guitar signal. I think a lot of people who make this point and try to take it super literally forget that guitar technique and skill, not the same as guitar tone. Not the same thing at all. Speaking of tone, obviously we had to talk about tone wood. Tone wood makes somewhat of a difference when it comes to acoustic instruments. When it comes to electrified instruments, it makes a very, very, very small difference. Now, I'm actually not going to say that it makes no difference at all, because that wouldn't necessarily be true. I used to think that until I watched an Aaron Rash video where he was comparing Mustang bodies with different wood types, and you could actually hear a pretty noticeable difference when he switched from like normal ash to swamp ash. So it does make a small difference, I'll be honest. But the amount of difference that it makes is like kind of almost imperceptible. Is that a word? Imperceivable? Imperceptible, there we go. The amount of difference that it makes is like almost imperceptible. And if you're running your guitar through a bunch of distortion and other effects, it's probably going to be like almost next to impossible to tell the difference. Most often, if you see a manufacturer who is advertising their guitar to have a specific tone wood, it's probably a marketing scam to get you to pay more. One that I see people say all the time is that you should not adjust your truss rod yourself. Take it to a luthier or a trusted professional. Now, I won't act like adjusting your truss rod is the easiest thing in the world and it's not totally idiot proof, but it is pretty easy if you just do a couple little Google searches. Mostly anybody can set up a guitar. If you just spend like an hour out of your day to learn how to set up a guitar properly, you may need a couple tools like an Allen key or a little feeler gauge or whatever, but you're not going to break your truss rod. Just be careful with it, adjust it a small amount at a time. And if you really do feel that uncomfortable that you're going to destroy your guitar, sure, just take it to a luthier. You have to change your strings every X amount of weeks or months or before you record, or before you perform. The string thing has been done to death, dude. You really don't have to change your strings very often, if at all. If you like the sound of new strings and particularly don't like the sound of dead strings, then sure, go ahead and buy new strings however often you feel like it. But don't listen to anybody who's telling you that you need to change them every time you record or whatever. Just change them if they look or feel gross, if they sound noticeably worse than they should, if you're having problems with tuning stability, or if you just want to. Oh, well, good guitar players don't use a capo. I mean, I shouldn't even have to explain this one. Obviously not true. Capos are a really great tool for like quickly transposing things that you want to play, which is also incredibly important for songwriting. There's a multitude of reasons you might want to use a capo, and the whole like capos are bad thing is just so ridiculous. Oh, solid state amps sound horrible. So a lot of times they're referring to the sound of distortion on a solid state amplifier as opposed to a tube amplifier. I mean, this is just subjective. They're just two different sounds, and you may like one over the other. Tubes do not make any piece of gear inherently better than any other. I also think it's so funny because people who say this also oftentimes will go into the front of their amplifier with something like this. They'll swear up and down that tube amps are better, and then they'll use something like a BD2 or a TS9. Well, I got news for you. This is a solid state distortion. I think most of where this comes from is that the early solid state amplifiers did kind of sound pretty bad, but the technology has come a long way since then. We're not living in the 1840s anymore, so you don't have to listen to all the guitar boomers who tell you tube's better than solid state. Another big myth that I think really everybody's a part of is the whole idea that certain guitars are better for certain genres. You probably see this guitar and you think like indie rock or shoegaze or whatever. You might see something like a BC Rich guitar, and you think, oh, this is a metal guitar. But quite frankly, no guitar is really specifically made for any one genre. Certain guitars may have certain characteristics that make it better for one genre or another, but it's really just about how you individually use the guitar. The truth is we just have certain associations between guitars and certain genres. Another one I hear a lot of is, this pedal sounds bad, or I don't like the sound of Boss pedals. One thing that I've found over time by just reviewing pedals and playing around with different pedals is that you can pretty much make any pedal sound good if you actually know what you're doing. Most people just really don't don't know how to dial in their tone properly. And there are also so many factors that affect the way a pedal sounds. Whatever other pedals you have before it in the chain, as well as the actual guitar you're using, there are so many different factors, and maybe you just don't like a specific pedal, that's totally fine. But trying to say that all Boss pedals sound bad is just really ridiculous and makes you sound like you don't know what you're doing. In that same vein is the whole idea that cheap gear is bad. I mean, I really shouldn't have to explain this one too in depth, so I'm just gonna say it's not about the tools that you have, it's about how you use them. If the best guitar player in the world has the cheapest gear, he's gonna make that stuff sound good, and if the worst guitar player in the world has the most expensive rig, he's not gonna be able to make it sound good. Getting hung up on gear and the price of gear is really ridiculous and a total waste of your time. Along those lines, a lot of people seem to think that vintage guitars are somehow better than new guitars. Just not true, and also totally dependent on the brand and the specific guitar you're talking about. Actually, more often than not, vintage guitars are gonna have more problems than modern guitars. They've just been around for longer, which means that there's more things that can go wrong. If you buy a vintage guitar and you don't have to do at least a little bit of work on it, consider yourself very lucky. This one may seem a little hypocritical compared to my last points, but I think the idea that cheap gear is better for beginners is kind of a myth also. While I do see the logic in buying a cheaper guitar for your kid who's just starting guitar, out of fear that he's just gonna pick it up and play it for 2 weeks and then never play it again, that obviously makes a lot of sense. But you also have to consider the fact that as a beginner, if you're using a cheap guitar, a lot of times those guitars are gonna be a lot less comfortable and just a little bit harder to play overall, which actually in some cases can kind of put people off of wanting to play guitar because they're like, wow, this is really hard. But in reality, they don't realize that they're actually just fighting against a guitar that's really badly made. Also, if the guitar has problems with tuning stability and intonation and that kind of stuff, you're not even gonna sound good when you're playing it. So you might be like, oh wow, I sound horrible. I shouldn't even be playing guitar if I sound this bad. So I would say if your budget allows it and you're shopping for a beginner guitar, maybe go up a little bit in the price bracket so that you actually get a guitar that's just a little bit more enjoyable to play. All right, now kind of a counterpoint to that is people saying, I wish I could get into guitar, but it's just too expensive. I'm gonna go on Facebook Marketplace right now and see how long it takes me to find a guitar that's like $50. There we go, electric guitar for $80. I don't know how long that was, but that was at least under a minute for sure. I know my screen protector is destroyed, but look, this is a Squier Strat, like double humbucker, $80. You could definitely offer that guy 50 bucks and he'd probably accept it. If I could do that in 15 seconds, you can surely find a cheap guitar out there. You don't have to buy everything brand new. In fact, I would advise against doing that. In my opinion, it's kind of a scam to pay $250 for a brand new Squier Strat when you can just buy that one for 50 bucks. While it is true that eventually over time, if you become obsessed with guitars and making music, it can become a rather expensive hobby, but that is also your choice. I buy a bunch of guitars and pedals and stuff because that's what I enjoy and it's also kind of my job, but you could have just as much fun with a single guitar and a single amp. Another big myth that I want to dispel is the idea that you don't have to learn anything about music production if you want to play guitar. Now, if you take this at face value, it's obviously true. You don't have to learn anything about music production, but it will really help you a lot because if you stick with playing guitar, you are gonna reach a point when you probably want to record some of your own music, and knowing how to do that is a really valuable skill. Also, learning music production will help you a lot with knowing what a compressor does and what an EQ does and how to dial in your tone properly to get it to sound good. Also, it really helps with recreating tones. If you like guitar, you're most likely gonna have a guitar tone that you want to emulate, and if you know nothing about how that guitar tone was produced, it's gonna be really hard for you to just blindly try to recreate that. Alright, this is one that I learned from my 7th grade basketball coach, but the idea that practice makes perfect is also a myth because perfect practice makes perfect. I know it seems like a little bit of a semantics point, but it really is a big difference. Because if you start practicing imperfect technique, all that's gonna do is just reinforce imperfect technique. It is much better to first focus on getting the correct techniques down and then practicing that over and over. Top 5 best hacks to make you better at guitar. I hate to break it to you, but if you ever see a video like that, it's probably a myth or sensationalized in some way. Now, there definitely are some things you can practice to improve your playing, but that's the key word there, practice. There's no secret hack or cheat code that's going to make you a lot better at guitar overnight. You literally just have to do it all the time. And that's another thing, you're really not going to get a whole lot better just by noodling around all the time. Developing some sort of practice routine is probably a good idea because otherwise the growth that you see in your guitar playing will probably be relatively slow. Another one that I see all the time is people thinking that you need to learn how to play songs if you want to play guitar. I personally know very little riffs in songs. It's just not something that I spend a whole lot of time on because I'm just actually making my own music. That being said, it does come in handy for a few reasons. If you ever happen to pick up a guitar around another person, particularly a non-musician, they will most likely be like, oh, can you play this song? And being like, oh no, but I can play like all the cowboy chords, doesn't really mean a whole lot to them. They just want you to play Sweet Home Alabama or whatever. Another one is the idea that you need to know music theory in order to play guitar. This is not really true at all. There's a lot of really great guitar players who didn't know any theory at all and they were still incredible and influential. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm just kind of putting individual notes together and trying to build a chord shape, right? If I do this, you can hear that that doesn't sound right. It doesn't take any sort of theory or musical knowledge to know that's kind of an unpleasant sound. Whereas maybe this, that sounds good. I like that. Maybe I've got no idea what it is, but I know it sounds good. Now it's time for devil's advocate. The idea that you don't need to know theory is also a myth. And more importantly, the idea that knowing theory is going to make you less creative. This is just not true and kind of a cope for people who are too lazy to learn theory. Music theory is not some weird mystical superpower that like totally changes the way you play guitar. Think of it like a language. It just explains everything that you're already doing on guitar, and it just gives everything a name so that you understand what you're doing and you can make educated choices based on each different thing that you're doing. If anything, it might actually unlock more creativity for you. And second to last here is the idea that you need to take lessons in order to learn guitar. This maybe was true like 40, 50 years ago, but we got this little thing called the internet now where pretty much anybody can learn how to do anything at all. It just actually takes discipline for you to sit down and make yourself learn how to play guitar. And sure, some people don't have that discipline and would benefit from taking lessons to learn instead, but if you're really passionate about it and you really want to learn, you're gonna find a way. And finally, another devil's advocate moment, you don't need to take lessons in order to get good. While the former point still stands and is still very valid, you absolutely don't need to take lessons if you want to get good, but most likely any guitar player at any skill level will benefit from some guided lessons from a teacher. Like I said, I'm totally self-taught, but I learned so much by just like sitting down with guys who are way better at guitar than me and having them just tell me different techniques and teach me things about my guitar playing. It will never hurt to have a little bit of guidance with your guitar playing, and having a teacher of some sort is always going to make you probably a lot better. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much going to do it for me in this video here today. I don't know how long this video is actually going to come out to be, but it felt like a really long one. I feel like I tackled a lot of points here, but if there's any other ones that I missed, like I said, leave them down in the comments. Let me know which one of these is your least favorite guitar myth that you hate hearing on the internet. Anyways, I really appreciate you all watching as always, and I will catch you all in the next video.